All right, welcome back to Grimerica Outlawed. We have Frater Eleftheria with us tonight. He's a practitioner of the great work since 2007. I would probably call him a mage, but we'll see what he calls himself. He teaches spirituality, esotericism, and the hidden secrets of religion on his YouTube channel, which is at Lifting the Lamp. And there's a link in that in the show notes. He's been doing this for spent over 15 years dedicating himself to this stuff. We're going to talk about all kinds of crazy stuff, but thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I wanted to. I think it's worth just getting into a little bit about your background. I didn't want to do too much of a bio. Actually, I don't even have that much of a bio on you. You seem to keep fairly secretive, but you're out there on YouTube. You're putting your stuff out there. A lot of your crazy journeys across the abyss and back, and some of that kind of stuff. But maybe a little bit of background for context about how you got into magic and maybe some of your training, if it's official or not, or that kind of thing. And then we'll talk about maybe your journey towards I feel like is just a bit more of like a Christian take maybe on it.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a lifelong, I suppose you would say, experiencer in the UAP world. I've always had experiences of weird things, and so I've always had a certain fascination with that stuff. And then when I was a teenager, I discovered magic and just knew that it was for me. And that sort of began me on my journey towards the Western esoteric tradition. And then when I graduated high school, I was looking for a group that I could join, found the OTO, Auto Templi Orientis, and joined them. And then later the AA, or Argentium Astrum. And so most of my training, if you will, in esotericism has come from there, as well as a lot of self-directed learning, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
And then but then I eventually, as you were alluding to, left the OTO and the AA, decided that Thelema, which is the belief system that those groups espouse, was not for me so much anymore, and started to explore Christianity again. But I wouldn't consider myself a Christian, but I've definitely rediscovered a appreciation for Christ as a teacher, and exploring the more esoteric forms of Christianity, which don't get quite as much airtime as, the mega churches or the Catholic Church or that sort of thing, the more exoteric forms of that religion.
That seems to be a trend. I mean, we've had all these guests, these past guests on that we've seen them like actually become Christians or more. They're non-denominational though. They've turned toward Christ, probably more than what you're saying, more direct, but still non-denominational. Still this like following the Christ teachings, right? Which would have still got you canceled way back when. I mean, I don't think the church would have put up with that shit a few hundred years ago. But what was just back to the original interest in magic? So did you have like sort of abduction or UFO experiences when you were younger? And then what kind of magic did you first resonate with? Like what did you first see when you were a teenager that got you interested in it?
Yeah, good questions. So, I guess I had lots of different experiences, lots of different dreams in particular that were highly symbolic. And at the time, I didn't see any connection between anything. Like if there was a dream that was more esoteric, like about Atlantis or something, and then a dream that was about alien beings, I didn't see the connection there. It was only really this year that I started to see that it's perhaps all part of the same thing. But yeah, between the ages of about 11 and 14, I had a series of very vivid dreams about alien encounters, where I would see a craft, often go up into a craft, or something would come out of it and then talk to me or give me some kind of a download or something like that. And, when I was a kid, I kind of, it felt pretty real. I thought, because I had quite a vivid imagination, I thought, well, this could be something real that's going on. And then later I kind of decided they were just dreams until I started doing the CE5 protocols and stuff started to happen with the phenomena that I was seeing that was linking back to the dreams. Uh, so yeah, so that was one part of my kind of inner journey in that early part of my life. And then, yeah, there were also experiences that I had that were more kind of traditionally esoteric, I suppose. Like, in particular, when I was 13, I had a past life memory of being in Egypt before the pharaohs, this kind of ancient pre-dynastic time, and I followed a person who was a master called Thoth, and I didn't know anything about that. There were really people that taught that Thoth was a real person and had followers and things like that back then. But then it turns out that that's a whole thing. So that got me interested in Thoth. That led me to the Western esoteric tradition, and that's kind of how I found magic. And then I was about 16 or 17 when I really started to explore that.
And then, so where should we go from here? Do you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of started resonating back with Christianity again, and how long ago that was? Was that around 2020, or was that just a few years ago? Or
Yeah, well, it was kind of a bit of a process. So yeah, there were a few things that were gradually sort of walking me back to that happened during my time practicing Western esotericism. So one thing was uh, a lot of the magic that I did, particularly later, in my period practicing magic, was angelic magic, particularly Enochian magic, and when you and so basically that's a form of magic where you set up a ritual and you communicate with angels through a technique called scrying, and yeah, it's essentially going into a type of trance, and you can see it as similar to channeling, but you try and get these messages from these angels. And so I was doing a lot of that, and the messages that I was getting were encouraging me to kind of go more in that direction of what the traditional monotheistic religions teach about morality and loving others and being a good person. So that's really where the process began. And then I had an experience with Jesus during a ritual where I was kind of facing some of my darkest shadow aspects, and I sort of had to get over my aversion to Christianity that I developed because of some negative experiences with the Catholic Church and the authoritarianism in some of the manifestations of that people are brought up with, and so that allowed me to reconnect with Christ again, and also exploring Gnostic Christianity started to bring me closer to Christ as well, and I had a newfound appreciation for being able to do that and acknowledge, while acknowledging that what we get taught about Christ and Jesus quite often is not the full picture, that there's different ideas about what was going on then. There's all these different gospels that have a much different picture that they paint of Jesus as an initiator and a esoteric teacher and one who was trying to awaken us and help us to ascend and escape an illusory world. And so that was all helping me to get back to thinking about how Christ fit into my path. And yeah, so there are loads of things that have been leading me back there. And then also, I guess, I have been affected by the thing that many of us have felt, I think, over the last few years, where there's been such a concerted effort to mock Christ in media and elsewhere, and to discourage people from that way of thinking, that it almost made me think, well, what don't they want us to know about
exactly,
this
yeah,
story?
it becomes the
And
rebellious stance. So
yeah, which is just wild that, if you told me when I was a Catholic schoolboy that following Jesus would be a form of rebellion in 20 years, I would have said that, I would have looked at you funny.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's fascinating. Well, I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll kind of lay out some of the things that I want to discuss or that I'd like to talk to you about, and then maybe we can decide where to go from there. Because I've had a similar. I mean, it's not the same as yours at all, but the time frame. Like I went through the CE5 thing in the '90s, in the mid '90s. I was doing that, but then I became interested in magic later on. Like since we started the show, probably 2013, 2014, and and then the C5 thing, I kind of just stopped. I experienced enough to know we're contacting something, but then I started to. The more I learned about magic and what was going on, I was like, I don't know if I should be doing anything without proper training, that type of thing. So that's kind of where I was at, is like just being careful to make contact with anything. So, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And then I wanted to ask you about some details about about protection and making contact and because you've been very open and honest on your channel about crossing the abyss and making contact with some evil entities, and I'd like to know if you've sort of changed your mind about that, but then also kind of about the greater spiritual war that's going on right now, and we have kind of a pushback against new age and against some of the stuff that you've even been doing on your channel from sort of more of a hardcore Christian perspective. So there, on one hand, we have more people going towards Christ, but we also have this weird pushback against secret societies and the new age movement that I don't really agree with all of it, but I can see why some people blame that for everything that's sort of evil in our world right now. And then I guess that's probably enough for now to kind of just pick apart a little bit about that. What's your thoughts about where to go from here?
yeah. Well, in terms of the presence of spiritual evil in our world, well, and protection against that, and whether that exists, and the backlash against New Age and stuff. Um, I mean, it's all kind of related, but yeah, absolutely. There are things out there that you can contact that are not don't have your best interests at heart, that are malevolent entities, and that some people say that the demonic is just our own repressed unconscious. It's just our own repressed shadow. But I think it's a bit more than that. I think there's something out there that has an intelligence to it that can work through that part of us and can manipulate us, because that's the most like it that exists within us. But it seems to be a spiritual phenomenon, a preternatural phenomenon. And I have encountered it. And yeah, my most popular video was about how I experimented with the Goetia. Well, more than experimented, really, with the Goetia when I was younger, which is a magical text, which is all about how King Solomon summoned demons to help him build the temple. And so, it's talking about how you can use the power of God to command demons, but it's a dangerous practice. And yeah, I stand by what I said in that video, that I wouldn't recommend that people do it, and that demons, you think you might have the upper hand when you're dealing with a demon by putting certain protections in place, but they're very deceitful, and they'll look at any chink in the armor that you put on to exploit, and they don't have the best intentions for us. Um, that even though there's people now who all over Instagram and stuff who are like, I worked with, whoever it is, King, whoever, and they've really helped me improve my life.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all, that's the hook. But then, later on, it starts to have a negative impact dealing with those kinds of entities. And I think that they're alive and well in our world, and I think they're having an influence on the culture through various means. And yeah, I think that people are recognizing that, and they're reacting against all forms of alternative religion, all forms of occultism, and I think Yeah, what we're seeing a kind of, because we've got this polarization in society where you're on one of two teams.
Yeah.
So, where you've got people going back to Christ, which is amazing. They're also adopting this really hardcore form of Christianity where it's like, well, everything else is demonic. Yoga's demonic, Reiki's demonic, tarot cards are demonic. Um, you know, UAP entities are demons, and so that's kind of causing a lot of the backlash against this stuff. And there are real groups that practice um, what can only be described as Satanism, I suppose.
Yeah, or
What
black
people,
magic or yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And there's some people in some very powerful positions behind the scenes doing some really dark stuff, and that's undeniable. But it's not all the same thing. And yeah, there's forms of occultism that are much more positive and geared towards freeing the human spirit. So I guess that's one thing I would encourage people to keep in mind.
Isn't that all like with the tarot cards, especially? I mean, I don't know about yoga, but a lot of that would be considered a false idol, wouldn't it? That's like strictly forbidden to. Is it? Can yourself be considered a false idol?
Well, yeah, I think that the self is definitely a false idol for many people today, and it's been built up to be one for sure. The objection to tarot cards tends to be because there's some verses in the Bible um, which are against certain forms of divinatory practice. And then King James came along with his new translation of the Bible and just made it apply to all forms of divination. Was forbidden. But it was really a prohibition on certain types of divination, like necromancy, and to calling up the spirits of the dead to give you answers to things, or some of the pagan rituals that got used for divination, and it was more because they were pagan than anything else. But there's forms of divination in the Bible as well, that very godly people use, like the Urim and the Thummim that the high priest would use in the Old Testament. But yeah, all of this stuff gets lumped together, and there's a lot of fear-based beliefs out there about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, even in
Can
the
you get a
Malleus
free?
Maleficarum they allowed certain types of, like, if you're, I think it was the stars, and if you were following sort of the astrological thing, I think they said that was okay, but any other kind of form, it was very weird how they drew the lines between what was like witchcraft and what was okay for the Catholic Church.
Astrology is okay.
I don't think they called it astrology though, but they called it something with the stars, like, I don't know if they said measuring the stars, or I can't remember the words they used. But what were you going to say, Darren?
Well, you said that King changed the Bible. That was King James, right? That was in what, the 1400s or the 1600s,
16, I think 16 or 17, right?
and that's the main one now. Can you get an earlier one than that? Is there like what's the most unfucked with one? Is it? I was seeing something today that said it's the Ethiopian one, but then I can't read whatever that's written in. So is there like, what Bible do you recommend that has the most? That, because like if he's changing shit, well, who else changed some shit? Like, I'd like to get back to like as close to source as possible. I mean, we were even trying to use AI to retranslate some of the original scrolls, but I mean, it clearly turned out that it was just lying to us.
Well, the Gospel of Thomas was one I was going to do on audio. I was going to narrate that one for audio, and then you were talking about that, Frater, because that was found in the 1900s, right? In the Nag Hammadi, I think.
Yeah, it was I always get the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi
Yeah,
mixed
yeah,
up. The
me
Dead
too.
Sea Scrolls were older pre-Christian texts, I think. That's right. Yeah, the Nag Hammadi was the Gnostic Gospels. Yeah, that's right. That's where it was located. And although Thomas usually gets dated to later than um, most of the canonical Gospels, it does seem to be growing out of a interpretation of Christianity that is as old as what is being put forward in the canonical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if not older. Yeah, so and it's a very different form of Christianity. It's all about becoming Christ yourself, and following in Christ's footsteps to follow him and ascend to heaven, basically. And yeah, it's very different to the picture that Paul paints of a suffering Messiah who dies for our sins and all of that sort of thing. So it's just those interesting differences. And then in terms of the translation, that's the best one. I would say for the New Testament writings to go back to the original Greek, and then the Old Testament is to go back to the original Hebrew, because those were sort of the original languages that those were written in. Although the people who lived in the times of the Gospel spoke Aramaic. Yeah, those are usually if you go back to the language that it was written in, that's where you usually get the most accurate picture of what's going on. And the Ethiopian Bible actually is interesting as well, because they've got very different books in there as well. So they've actually got the Book of Enoch in their Bible. I can't remember if it's the first or second Book of Enoch, possibly but they've got one of the books of Enoch in there, which is all about the Watchers, and it's just a wild story. And the Ethiopian church is one of the oldest churches in the world. So it's very interesting Bible.
Is there any that are more complete than that? Or not, maybe not complete, but have more things included in them? And if not, what is like left out? Because do any of them have the Dead Sea Scrolls in them? Like, is that what do any of them have that in them, or?
No, none of them have got the the Ethiopian Bible's got one of the books of Enoch in it.
And the Jubilees, is somebody's written in the notes here. I forgot about that. That's the other one I wanted to do too, the Jubilees.
Yeah, the Jubilees. And in terms of the Gnostic Gospels, they never made it into a final cut of the Christian Bible or anything. They were kind of hidden away in vases and things like that, and only resurfaced like 1947 or around then. So yeah, but that's revolutionized our understanding of Christianity. I think we're still feeling the effects of that in terms of discovering what's going on in those Gospels.
I was just narrating part of this book on the history of magic, and I copied this in here for us because I knew it might become applicable. But speaking of Christ is from more of a mystical perspective, they said here it was the Bible was the true key and interpreter. John, not the less than Moses, Elias, Enoch, David, Solomon, Daniel, Jeremiah, and the rest of the prophets, was a magician, Kabbalist, and diviner. So they're calling, whether that's accurate or not. I mean, there was a point when Christianity did seem more mystical, and then it changed as the Catholic Church seemed to get a hold of it or something. But it felt more magical in the early times.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the earliest images that we have of Jesus, he's holding a magic wand. He's presented as a magician. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of magical history there that got lost with the origin of Christianity, and even some of these moments in the Old Testament as well. I mean, Moses, for example, like why were his miracles identical to the magic tricks that the Pharaoh's magicians could do? Are they perhaps doing the same sort of thing? Are they perhaps both a form of magician? Have they learnt from the same kind of source material, since Moses spent so much time in Egypt? These are all questions that start to emerge.
Yeah. So what the other thing I was thinking about when you mentioned about the demons and stuff, because back before Christ, BC. I mean, the daemons were not really demons. That's the other thing that's changed is it seemed somewhat normal for these great philosophers and these great students and what would I call them? Even magicians, I guess. They would have their I don't think a familiar is the right term, but a daemon, not a demon, but they called it the daemon, like it was a little helper that they had. And then I guess so it's weird because that wasn't considered evil back then. But now anything that you would say like, oh, I'm summoning my, a helper, it would be considered evil. And even if it was even if you said, well, no, it's my guardian angel, like this is where we're at a point right now where and it affected me because I was like, man, I don't even want to try and make contact with anything external because I just don't trust what it's going to be on the other end. And maybe I need to go through more training or whatever, but that seems to be where we're at. Is we can't even, like, now with the dogma that's happening. These are tools that can be used either way, but now that it's all just like, oh yeah, it's all evil or it's all good. Like it seems very they're trying to make it very black and white, but I think they're all just tools that can be used for good or for bad. I mean, even Blavatsky and the Theosophists warned against going through any of this stuff without training. I think that's why they have initiations and why it's important to learn more. And that's the other thing that's happening right now is people are just dabbling in it, like dabbling in all kinds of stuff without the level of knowledge or experience that you probably need to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, and I think our view of certain types of spirits has changed over time, and yeah, the daimon of the ancient Greeks was more often than not just almost like a familiar spirit, which of course in the Old Testament is still something which is considered unclean spiritually, but different cultures had different views, and a lot of things got demonized later by the church, and in fact, a lot of the pagan gods got transformed or reinvented as demons. So, yeah, there was a lot of that happening and making things more black and white than they are. But having said that, when you're dealing with the spiritual world, there are some nasty things out there, and you don't always know what you're going to get. And sometimes you might be trying to contact something angelic, and then something else kind of interferes and tries to pass itself off as an angel when it might actually be your own ego, your own rational mind interfering, or more sinister, it could be some kind of what might be classed as a demonic spirit, which is trying to lead you astray. So we do have to practice discernment, and that's why I guess in the Western esoteric tradition, as I've learnt it, you have a circle that you draw around you, a protective circle, which symbolizes really creating a boundary, setting boundaries between you and whatever you're contacting, not letting it have too much undue influence without knowing anything about it first. There's various banishings that you can do to clear the space if something's seems like it's not there for the right intentions. There's different ways that you can test the spirit to see what it really is, whether it's really there for the right reasons. So all of that stuff is very important. But I think that mainstream Christianity takes things too far in the other direction. It's like even angels would be considered demons by the Catholic Church. They'd say that. So like, because they'd read Paul and they'd say, oh, well, this means that angels can never talk to anyone ever again.
Yeah.
So if you think you're talking to an angel, it's really demons. But there's ways that you can test that and see whether what you're really dealing with, and you can tell by the fruits as well. If something has a negative spirit, it'll cause negative situations in your life. If it's a positive spirit, it'll lead you closer to God ultimately, and that's the real test, I feel.
Yeah.
Is that the argument for conjuring Any sort of spirits, then I guess is to try and get closer to God, because it seems like it's just a risky endeavor, best to be avoided for the most part, from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, well, it certainly comes along with risks. I mean, it's each to their own. It's not necessarily something that I would encourage everyone to do. It's certainly not something that I would encourage people that are mentally unstable to do. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I've had good results, but I'm I don't know. I could be a special case.
But
I'm
you've also had good results that have been bad. I mean, it depends on how you say good results. I mean, you've gone through like hell and back, literally, probably. I mean, at least through the abyss and back. I mean, so maybe we could just talk about that because Banksia there in the chat says, "Can you tell us a story about how that happened to you and what you did about it? How did you know it wasn't what you summoned?" Or if that hasn't happened to you, maybe just an experience about some of the stuff that you have summoned, or maybe about your crossing the abyss. I know those are some big topics, but
yeah. Well, I guess there have been times where I've been in a ritual contact, trying to contact an angel, and some of the things that it says, it's just feeding back what you want to hear, and things which you already know, um, which you just confirming what you want to be true, not really having much depth. And in those situations, it's not so much that there's an evil spirit that's involved, but it's more that it's your own mind interfering.
okay.
So
Sounds
yeah,
like
when
ChatGPT.
yeah, yeah, kind of. Yeah, yeah. But a communication from an angel will be sublime. It's the kinds of things that they say. It's like the sort of things that you read in the Psalms, for example, and simple yet really deep, hard hitting truths is usually the way that their communications come through. And yeah, so if there's anything that's confused or muddled or seems to be encouraging egotistical behaviors, for example, then that's a good sign that it's not really something angelic coming through. And you need to banish the space and call upon God to kind of, compel a different result. But yeah, but the crossing of the abyss was another example of a spiritual experience that I definitely don't regret having had now that I've actually gone through it. But it's not necessarily something I would recommend for people because it is incredibly risky. So you wanted to talk more about that, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's worth people. Yeah, I think it's worth it for people to know. Again, but not recommended.
Yeah, it's so it's essentially a form of initiation that people can go through once they've done quite a bit of this esoteric path beforehand. And it's where you basically dissolve your sense of self and completely destroy your sense of self in the abyss and experience what it's like to be beyond that. And then your sense of self, your personality rather, is reconstituted afterwards, with some different perspectives. But you can't hold anything back in that experience. You need to surrender everything that you ever were to the abyss, and be completely open to um, just entering the supernal triad, as it's called in Kabbalah, the highest levels of, you know realms of existence, realms of consciousness that are closest to God, where there's no separation between things. And in order to do that, yeah, you need to kind of let go of this idea of being that your sense of self, or your sense of worth is attached to things in this world. So and our preconceptions about the way the world is, which is based on dualities and things like that. So yeah, but it's quite it's an experience which the way you do it, you kind of have a visionary experience of a realm called the abyss, which sort of kickstarts all of this, and then that'll be followed by synchronicities in your life, which synchronicities that involve your life falling apart, basically, like experiences that are so intense that it just shatters your sense of self. So you can see from a psychological point of view why that would be dangerous and not necessarily recommended, and quite an extreme change to put yourself through for the sake of spiritual knowledge or spiritual experience. So some people feel called to do it, but again, it's not something that I would recommend for most people.
Why did you want to do it?
Well, I kind of been practicing Western esotericism for a number of years, nearly 2 decades, and I don't know. I've always wanted to push things as far as I can, and push myself as far as I can in terms of having experiences and things, and perhaps doing things that are a bit risky. And so, this is another example of that. Just seeing how far that I could go, really. And
Does that include psychedelics?
psychedelics is something that I have not explored.
Because I mean, I was just thinking while you're describing all this that it kind of sounds like smoking DMT.
Yeah, well, I mean,
At
there
least
are people
parts of
that
it.
use it in that way. Sorry?
At least parts of it, maybe not the whole thing, but parts of it definitely overlap with the DMT experience.
Yeah, well, there were, shamanic cultures and things that used the ayahuasca plant for that purpose, and DMT is I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but DMT is a naturally occurring molecule in the brain, which is commonly present during near-death experiences and spiritual experiences. So, yeah, I can see why people would use it in that way, and how it could bring about a very similar kind of experience to what I'm talking about. But yeah, personally, I've always opted for the all natural method, I suppose.
That's what Graham does.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting. So I guess because I understand the challenge, like it would be a challenge aspect, but after listening to you talk about, both when you on your YouTube channel, you have, 2 parts of this, and I didn't realize you'd be encountering, you basically encountering the principalities and each one, and going through basically a challenge in a way with all these evil spirits. So I don't know, maybe I'm describing it wrong even, but I can see how you would want to challenge yourself in that way, but it sounds pretty I don't know, scary is the right word, but you know, I don't know, do you want to describe a little bit of that aspect of it?
Sounds sketchy.
Yeah, yeah.
Sketchy.
It does sound scary, and you know, I realize that for a lot of people, this would sound like something like, why would you do that? But I think that there's been things preparing me for that my whole life, and even I was talking to you before about some of the dreams that I had when I was a kid. I feel like that was just kind of gently preparing me for contact with something non-human, putting myself in situations that might otherwise be a bit uncomfortable. But that's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, sometimes people can have done something in a previous incarnation as well, so it feels a bit more familiar to them. But yeah, there can be a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, I think what you're referring to there is the four princes of evil and the experience that I had with them in a ritual from the Book of Abramelin, which is related to the the crossing of the abyss, actually, because those four princes. I can't remember where I saw the reference now, possibly in the vision and the voice. But the name Coronzon, who is the demon of the abyss, is actually numerically the same as the names of these four princes of evil added up. So it's a similar thing that you're facing, and I think that was that was what the reference said. But anyway, I have to go back and check. But yeah, that was just the evoking of the four princes of evil was another intense experience that I put myself through, where I was sort of breaking down certain parts of my personality and facing the shadow aspects of my personality in quite a intense way. And in that magical operation, although it calls them demons and stuff, and perhaps there is something preternatural that's coming into that ritual. I think it is almost all to do with your own psychology and just exploring stuff that you have inside yourself. So yeah, that was part of the Book of Abramelin, which is another important book in this tradition, and it's the second part of that book. And you're not supposed to try and confront the four princes of evil and bind the four princes of evil until you've contacted another being, which is the holy guardian angel, and that represents it's kind of separate to us, but at the same time it can represent our higher self or the divine within us, sort of disguised as a external being, because we haven't integrated that yet. So yeah, that's been another important part of my journey, has been building a relationship with this holy guardian angel, which is really just myself.
Well, and I just thought about the bigger picture stuff too. I mean, because you are interested in this bigger sort of this bigger UAP slash angel and demon question that's happening, and we are living through the re-enchantment right now, like you called it in one of your videos, or maybe that was Diana Pasolka that actually coined that. But the re-enchantment of, I mean, we are living through amazing times. I mean, I'm just blown away by the amount of discussion that, like, we're having these discussions now, but so are all these other people that 10 or 15 years ago, when the new atheists and the skeptics were going hard after any kind of paranormal stuff. We are so far past that now. It's unbelievable. I mean, now the government's talking about UAPs and angels and demons in different dimensions, and that a Skinwalker Ranch is pretty much real now. I mean, we are living through disclosure. So maybe you were meant to go through that as part of your training for this, for what we're going through as humanity. Maybe you can, help a lot of people through this next phase.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting how those two worlds have collided
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that I think that it's interesting to see, like, the vice president talking about how UAPs are real and they're angels and demons. Like, it's just a wild timeline to be on. But yeah, we're reaching this moment now where, yeah, you've got the telepathy tapes as well. That was a huge thing
Huge
as well.
shift. Yeah.
Mm.
The people, you've got the people now, like, they're showing, like, they're blinding themselves, physically, covering their eyes, and they're able to see stuff. Like, that's finally gaining traction now too. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is really hard to debunk that's getting mainstream attention now.
Yeah, yeah, and the connection between UFOs or UAP and the world of angels and the esoteric is, I mean, it's always been there, but it's kind of always been sidelined as, like, those are the woo woo people, and we're interested in the nuts and bolts. And it's really, you've got a lot of really prominent people in the know saying, no, there's something spiritual here, that at least a part of the phenomenon is something spiritual. And I think that when I had my own experiences dreaming about certain what I thought were aliens, and then seeing the